A few years ago, I was a part of a meeting that was convened to resolve a misunderstanding between a man and his wife. They were having a misunderstanding because the woman discovered that the next of kin of her husband was his brother. She insisted that the condition for peace in the marriage was that the husband makes her his next of kin immediately, since she is his wife. She further demanded that the change must be made in all the official documents of the husband with immediate effect. When the man was asked the reason for not making his wife his next of kin, he was not disposed to disclose his fears to the people at the meeting for prudential reasons. However, he only said that he chose his brother as his next of kin because that was how he wanted it to be. His inability to be open was about frustrating the purpose of the meeting, as he did not want to wash their dirty linens in the public. In such situation, it was reasonable to fill the blank spaces with speculations, since it was obvious that there were very sensitive information he was deliberately and intentionally withholding. When it was my turn to address the meeting, I told the man and his wife that the challenge with their marriage was not really the subject of next of kin, but something more fundamental, which they were not willing to expose before the meeting. I further said that the misunderstanding on the subject of next of kin was a mere symptom of the fundamental challenge of their marriage. I told the meeting that the fundamental challenge of the marriage was that the man and the woman were not husband and wife, though they were living together and deceiving themselves that they were spouses. I advised them to go back and ascertain that they were husband and wife. I further told them that the crisis they were having on the subject of next of kin would be over immediately the fundamental challenge was resolved. The woman insulted the people at the meeting and walked away in disrespect. It was in her absence that the man opened up. I did not make her my next of kin because my life is not safe in her hands, he said. He continued, I am afraid that immediately she confirms that she is my next of kin, she would kill me, take possession of my wealth, and run away with her boyfriend. We then asked the man, why then do you retain her in your house as your wife, since you know that she is a threat to your life? He was unable to answer this question, but the interesting part of the story is that he summoned courage and ended the marriage shortly afterwards. Who should be your next of kin as a married person? Must it be your spouse? Are there circumstances you are not permitted to make your spouse your next of kin? If anyone other than your spouse should be your next of kin, who should the person be? Do you need the consent of your spouse to take such decision? These are the focus of this video. But before you continue watching this video, you should subscribe to this YouTube channel if you like watching educative and inspirational videos. You should also turn on the notification bell so that you will be informed whenever a new video is published in this channel. Before I continue, it is very important to explain who a next of kin is. A person's next of kin is his closest living blood relative or relatives, and this is usually the spouse or child. Adopted children are eligible to be the next of kin of their adopted parents, as they are treated as blood relatives. Relations by marriage are usually not next of kin. Parents are also hardly the next of kin of their children during their adult age, because their children should outlive them, though they are very eligible to be next of kin. Relatives like brothers, sisters, uncles, and aunts can also be a person's next of kin. If someone does not have any close adult relative, the next of kin could be the niece, nephew, or first cousin. As a strategy to ensure that the subject of next of kin does not constitute a challenge before the living after your death, It is very imperative that you officially declare your next of kin during your lifetime. For instance, people declare their next of kin and their detailed contacts before their employers. Their employers contact their next of kin whenever the need arises. People also notify the banks they have accounts with of their next of kin. The next of kin have the right to inherit the money in the person's bank accounts after his death. In addition, some business transactions are incomplete without the next of kin. This is the reason people declare their next of kin while purchasing landed properties. As a matter of fact, the subject of next of kin is so significant that every adult should resolve it before his demise. As a rule of life and also a law of marriage, the closest person to your heart as a married person should be your spouse, not your mother, father, sister, brother, uncle, aunt, cousin, niece, nephew, or friend, though any of them would have been so to you before your marriage. In addition, your spouse should also be the most important person in your life. If your spouse is neither the closest person to your heart nor the most important person in your life, then something serious and fundamental is wrong with your marriage because your spouse occupies the wrong place in your life. Consequently, the ideal person to be your next of kin under normal circumstance is your spouse. This is one of the cardinal laws of marriage. An individual's choice of next of kin is usually not a controversy if the person has a happy marriage. But why should your spouse be your next of kin? The first reason is that your spouse ought to be the closest person to your heart and also the most important person in your life. Making your spouse your next of kin makes him or her to feel at home in your marriage. Such post of honor instills confidence in your spouse that he or she occupies the right place in your life. The second reason your spouse should be your next of kin is that next of kin has legal implications. In some legal systems, when someone passes away, rights regarding inheritance of wealth flow directly and automatically to the next of kin, regardless of the age, especially when the person did not write a will before his death. It is very instructive to note that if your spouse is not your next of kin, after your death, your wealth may be forcefully inherited by your blood relations who are your enemies and who do not care about the welfare, well-being, or future of your beloved children. There are numerous instances women who were living in peace with their husbands were falsely accused of being responsible for the death of their husbands by the families of their late husbands, just because the families want to forcefully eject them from their families with their children in order to inherit the wealth of their dead husbands. In addition to making your spouse your next of kin, you should consolidate the arrangements legally through some official documents, especially your will. The status of your spouse as your next of kin should reflect in your documents with your employer if you are an employee. It should also reflect in your business documents if you are an entrepreneur. Furthermore, it should reflect in your bank documents. Another reason your spouse should be your next of kin is that your spouse automatically inherits your responsibilities after your lifetime, especially if your death occurs prematurely. For instance, your spouse is the primary person that will be responsible for the upkeep of your children, as well as funding their education after your death. This is one of the most significant reasons your spouse ought to be the direct beneficiary of your inheritance after your death under normal circumstance, if you made him or her your next of kin. The consent of a person's next of kin is usually required during a medical emergency. Your spouse should be your next of kin so that he or she will have the legal capacity to take decision during such situation. This is another important reason your spouse should be your next of kin. It is very instructive to note that your next of kin can change from time to time. For instance, if your sibling was your next of kin before your marriage, you can replace him with your wife after your marriage. When you advance in age and have grown-up children, your child can replace your spouse as your next of kin. The change should reflect in all your official documents and records so that it will not become a controversy later. I noted earlier that the ideal person to be your next of kin under normal circumstances is your spouse, the person who ought to be the closest person to your heart and also the most important person in your life. I further noted that this is one of the cardinal laws of marriage. I also noted that an individual's choice of next of kin is usually not a controversy if the person has a happy marriage. However, this rule is not strict because there are some exceptions to it. The first exception is that any of your children can be your next of kin, though with the consent of your spouse, if your marriage has produced grown-up children. But if your children are underage, there may be no substitute to your spouse on the subject of next of kin if you have a happy and joyful marriage. Except for this reason, something serious may be wrong with you, your spouse, or your marriage if you cannot make your spouse your next of kin. It is very likely that you have an unhappy marriage if you cannot make your spouse your next of kin, except you have grown-up children. Your inability to make your spouse your next of kin may be evidence that you and your spouse are not meant for each other. This is the idea conveyed by the second exception to this rule. The exception is that your spouse should not be your next of kin if he or she is not responsible enough to be conferred with such honor. You should not make someone your next of kin just because the person is your spouse. There are some men that are irresponsible to the extent that they abandon their families and start new lives with other women and never bother about the upkeep, welfare, or well-being of their children, let alone their wives. If you have a husband like that, it may not be advisable to make him your next of kin, because if you make an untimely departure from this planet, he may inherit your wealth, abandon your children, start a new life with another woman, and fund the irresponsible lifestyle with your hard-earned money. If he does so while you are alive, what do you think will happen when you are no more? There are also some women that are irresponsible to the extent that they flirt while they live with their husbands, and their nasty relationships with their boyfriends constitute serious threats to their marriages. There are also some women who have no plan for their future because the only things they care about in life are expensive clothes, jewelries, shoes, bags, and so on. There is no doubt that such women would squander the hard-earned wealth of their husbands, which they inherit from them after their deaths, because they are their next of kin. The most painful part of the ugly story is that they can sacrifice the future of their children in order to satisfy their present comforts and extravagant lifestyle. Neither of these categories of people is qualified to be the next of kin of their spouses because of their irresponsible lifestyles. If you are also afraid that your spouse is so desperate of making money that he or she can waste your life in a hurry in order to inherit your wealth, you should not make your spouse your next of kin. Needless to say that you should not even retain your marital relationship with such a person because it puts your life in jeopardy. If you find yourself in any of the above situations, who should you make your next of kin if your children are underage? Prior to deciding who your next of kin should be, a very important question you should ask yourself is, will the person satisfactorily and creditably perform the responsibilities expected of you in your absence in the case of an eventuality? In other words, should you make a sudden departure from this planet, will the person step into your shoes? Will he ensure the upkeep and welfare of your children? Will the person ensure that the education of your children is not interrupted? Will he also ensure that your aged parents are well taken care of? If your spouse will not be responsible enough to do so, then any close relation of yours who is more responsible than your spouse, in your best and honest judgment, is better qualified to be your next of kin. This is the reason some people make their siblings their next of kin while their spouses are alive. It is very instructive to note that there are some people you are reasonably certain that will step into your shoes in case of eventuality, even if they are not your next of kin. One of such people should be your next of kin. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you should click the subscription link below. If you have not subscribed to this YouTube channel, you should also turn on the notification bell so that you will be informed whenever a new video is published in this channel. I hope to meet you again in the next video. Thanks for watching.